The so-called chosen people narrative was never about holiness. It was about ownership, about control through covenant, obedience through fear, and the weaponization of divine authority. Every single prophetic layer, from Abraham to the Babylonian exile, reads like a national contract written in blood. And the currency? Human suffering. The texts don't hide it. They celebrate it. Every broken rule, every slip, every act of rebellion is punished not with correction, but annihilation. Because this isn't moral training, it's cosmic enforcement. Let's rewind. The entire prophetic machine begins with one moment, a voice calling a man, Abram, out of his homeland with a promise. Sounds pure, right? Land, descendants, blessing. But beneath that is the darker clause, obedience or extinction. It's a deal with razor edges. The promise comes with curses that read like war crimes, famines, diseases, invasions, slavery. The same God who promises milk and honey writes a contract dripping with blood. You miss that when it's read in Sunday schools. But the ancient world didn't. They saw it for what it was, a binding political document, a covenant that ties people to power through fear of divine reprisal. Now watch the pattern. Every generation is called to renew the covenant. Translation: reaffirm loyalty or face the sword. Moses lays it out on Sinai like a legal threat. The 10 Commandments aren't motivational slogans, they're binding clauses. And every violation, idolatry, disobedience, dissent, is prosecuted with merciless violence. The prophets don't apologize for this. They weaponize it. They call it justice. But read their tone, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Hosea, they sound like prosecutors, not poets. Their words slice. Their warnings aren't gentle, they're courtroom indictments against an entire nation. You've got to understand what this means historically. Israel's prophetic story isn't just spiritual. It's statecraft. Each prophet is part preacher, part political analyst, part intelligence officer. They read the geopolitical winds, the rise of Assyria, Babylon, Persia, and reframed them as divine instruments. The empires aren't random enemies, they're rods of God's anger. Every foreign invasion becomes proof that the covenant is real, that the punishment clause is in effect. It's brutal genius. The theology absorbs every national disaster and flips it into evidence of divine legitimacy. Lose a war? God is chastising us. Get conquered? We sinned. The belief system is self-reinforcing. It can't be falsified. That's not faith, that's psychological containment. By the time we reach the kingdom era, Saul, David, Solomon, the narrative transforms again. The covenant becomes monarchy. The prophet becomes court advisor. And the temple becomes a weapon. Solomon's temple isn't just a house of prayer, it's a control mechanism. It centralizes sacrifice, taxes, authority, and national identity. Every transaction with heaven must go through the temple. Every sin must be paid for in blood, animal blood, priestly bloodline, financial offerings. That's not primitive, it's structured economy. Religion becomes the currency of order. But here's where the system fractures. The kingdom splits, north and south, and the prophets turn into whistleblowers. They accuse kings of corruption, priests of extortion, citizens of idolatry. And you start to realize idolatry isn't just worshipping other gods. It's breaking the monopoly. The whole "no other gods before me" commandment? It's divine antitrust law. It's about loyalty to a single power structure. Every deviation, every new altar, every rival symbol threatens the system's control. And that's why the prophetic voice turns violent, it's policing loyalty. Now, here's the uncomfortable truth no mainstream church dares to touch: the wrath of God moments, those mass killings, famines, and exiles, aren't random divine moods. They're coded propaganda for national discipline. When the northern kingdom falls to Assyria, when Judah is crushed by Babylon, the prophets don't blame military weakness. They blame spiritual rebellion. The narrative shifts blame away from politics and economics and puts it squarely on the conscience of the people. That's psychological warfare dressed as divine revelation. Let's take Jeremiah as the prime example. His book is often romanticized, the weeping prophet, right? But read it like a political manifesto. He tells a besieged nation that surrendering to Babylon is the will of God. That's not spirituality, that's compliance. Jeremiah redefines treason as obedience. When he's jailed for it, his captors aren't punishing piety, they're silencing dissent. But the text spins it as faithfulness under persecution. See the pattern? Every act of submission is rewritten as divine loyalty. Every act of resistance becomes sin. And then comes the unthinkable, the temple burns. The very house of God, the structure that defined their world, is annihilated. The shock is total. But the theologians move fast. They rewrite the catastrophe as purification. The Lord allowed it to happen because we sinned. Again, self-reinforcing theology. The disaster doesn't disprove the system, it renews it. Now exile itself becomes prophetic proof. Babylon becomes the wilderness. Captivity becomes cleansing. You see how airtight the logic is? Every horror strengthens the claim. Every loss deepens the covenant. That's not just religion, it's narrative control at the civilizational level. Now, to the prophets of exile, Ezekiel, Daniel, these men speak in visions because politics failed them. They turn cosmic. They frame kingdoms as beasts, empires as statues of gold and iron. But underneath the imagery is the same code: history is surveillance. Everything is under watch. Every empire serves divine choreography. No autonomy. No coincidence. The prophetic mind can't tolerate randomness. Every rise and fall must serve the covenant story. That mindset is intoxicating, it gives meaning to suffering, but it also justifies endless punishment. And let's not skip over the psychological cost of that. When your entire identity rests on being both chosen and perpetually punished, you live in paradox. You can't escape guilt because guilt proves you're chosen. The pain itself becomes evidence of divine attention. That's why Israel's prophetic literature reads like trauma theology, cyclic, obsessive, self-referencing. The sins repeat because the punishment repeats. The punishment repeats because the identity requires it. Watch the pattern tighten. Prophets begin to talk about a remnant, a small, purified core who survive judgment. The rest can burn. This is the birth of religious elitism disguised as salvation. Only a fraction of the people qualify, the rest are unclean, faithless, cut off. The theology starts dividing its own house: purity cults, priestly orders, sectarian separation. By the time we get to Ezra and Nehemiah later, the ideology of separation becomes national policy: intermarriage banned, foreigners expelled, genealogies purified. The covenant morphs from moral code into bloodline management. And through it all, prophecy functions as enforcement. Not prediction, enforcement. The prophet's role isn't to tell the future, it's to demand conformity. Every so-called fulfillment is just history reinterpreted to validate the previous demand. When a war breaks out, when famine hits, when kingdoms fall, the scribes retroactively stitch it into the script. See? It happened just as the prophet said. That's not divine foresight, that's literary maintenance of control. Now, if you're still romanticizing this as some divine plan, let me be blunt, the plan depends on perpetual crisis. There's no stable peace in the prophetic system. The moment the people prosper, prophets appear to warn them it won't last. When they collapse, prophets appear to say they deserved it. It's an endless feedback loop designed to keep faith alive through fear. And that's why the prophetic tradition feels addictive. It feeds on chaos, not calm. Think about it, a deity that creates, destroys, forgives, and punishes the same people over and over. Is that a god of order or a god of dependency? The texts never pause to ask. They just record the next cycle: covenant, sin, judgment, repentance, restoration, repeat. Over 1,000 years of this pattern, and every generation is told it's the last one before final restoration. But it never ends. The real prophecy is the repetition itself. By the time the exile ends and the survivors return, the consciousness of Israel has been reprogrammed. Every event is now filtered through prophetic causality. Nothing happens without meaning. Every empire is divine punishment. Every survival is divine mercy. It's brilliant theology and a suffocating psychology. You can't breathe in a world where every tragedy is your fault and every success is conditional. You want the truth about the so-called covenant timeline? Fine. Let's rip it open. Forget the Sunday school fairy tales. This is not about spiritual intimacy between God and man. It's a contract. A contract written in blood, enforced by fear, and renewed through destruction. You want to know how deep it goes? It starts the moment a wandering nomad named Abram gets pulled into a negotiation he never fully understands. Leave your country, your family, your father's house. In other words, drop everything that defines you. Walk away from your history. The bait? Land, descendants, greatness. Sounds generous until you read the fine print. Because every blessing in this so-called covenant has a shadow clause attached to it. Every promise is paired with a potential curse. It's not a relationship, it's an ultimatum. The pattern's visible from the first breath of the Exodus story. The descendants of Abraham are enslaved, cry out, get delivered, and instantly enter a new form of bondage, the law. They leave Pharaoh's whips only to inherit Yahweh's commandments. The book doesn't hide that transition, it glorifies it. You are my people, he says, if you obey everything I tell you. It's conditional loyalty disguised as love. They walk through the Red Sea thinking they're free, not realizing they just swapped masters. And from that point on, every act of worship becomes surveillance. Every law, every ritual, every sacrifice is a test of compliance. That's not liberation. That's systemic conditioning. Let's be brutally clear, Sinai wasn't a spiritual retreat. It was a legal summit. A mounting court where the deity dictates terms and the people sign under duress. The commandments weren't offered, they were imposed. You didn't negotiate your clauses, you were threatened into submission. Lightning, thunder, smoke, earthquakes, it's theater. Psychological dominance through spectacle. Do not come near or you'll die. Fear is the enforcement mechanism. That's how total control works. You terrify obedience into the bloodstream. And it worked. The people begged Moses to speak for them. They didn't want direct contact with God. They were traumatized into mediation. That's the origin of priesthood, born not from closeness, but from terror. Now look at the structure of the covenant itself. It's patterned after ancient Near Eastern vassal treaties. One superior, one inferior. The superior provides protection and prosperity, the inferior pledges absolute obedience. The moment the inferior breaks the terms, the superior unleashes destruction. There's nothing mystical about it, it's politics disguised as prophecy. And Israel's covenant reads like a carbon copy of those imperial documents. If you keep my commandments, I'll bless you in the land. If you break them, I'll curse you, I'll scatter you, I'll destroy your cities. That's not spiritual poetry, that's divine blackmail. The carrot is fertility and victory. The stick is plague, drought, invasion. The blessing and curse formula isn't moral, it's administrative. The people are a contract workforce for a cosmic landlord. And guess what? The law is written to be impossible to keep. 613 commands, all intertwined, many contradicting. The system ensures perpetual guilt. You can't live under it without failing. That's how control is sustained. When everyone's guilty, everyone's manageable. Priests become the mediators of mercy, and mercy becomes a product. You sin, you pay. With doves, bulls, rams, whatever your economy allows. It's not just religion, it's infrastructure. The priestly caste controls the narrative, the calendar, the festivals, the forgiveness. Every time you sin, you validate their authority. Every time you sacrifice, you fund the system. That's genius in a dark way, divine bureaucracy dressed as holiness. People forget the Israelites weren't the only ones with laws, rituals, or holy mountains. Every ancient civilization had them. What made Israel unique wasn't ethics, it was exclusivity. You shall have no other gods before me. That line is not about purity of worship, it's about monopoly. It forbids spiritual competition. Every rival deity is labeled idol. Every foreign ritual becomes an abomination. The covenant doesn't just create a religion, it creates an information lockdown. The narrative must remain centralized. You worship one God, through one priesthood, at one location. Control the altar, and you control the people. And the storytelling enforces the same structure. Every disobedience becomes a national crisis. Build a golden calf? Thousands executed. Complain in the wilderness? Poisoned by serpents. Question leadership? The ground literally opens to swallow you. You're watching divine authoritarianism portrayed as righteous justice. It's power theater designed to terrify conformity into a generation. And that conditioning passes down generation after generation. It's not faith, it's fear encoded into family memory. Let's talk about the wilderness years. Everyone frames it as testing. But look closer, it's social engineering. 40 years of micromanagement, food controlled, manna only, movement restricted, pillar of cloud, behavior policed, law enforcement by plague. Every rebellion punished instantly. That's not spiritual discipline, it's behavior modification. By the time they reach Canaan, the old generation is dead. Literally erased. The new one is perfectly conditioned to obey without question. You can almost hear the gears of the system locking into place. Now fast forward to the conquest. This is where the covenant becomes outright genocidal. The command is crystal clear, do not leave anything alive that breathes. The land must be purged for the promise to stand. The logic? Divine real estate transfer. You can't inherit a land that's already occupied, so extermination becomes theology. The text justifies massacre by calling it obedience. Jericho burns as a ritual offering. Hazor, Makkedah, all erased in the name of covenant purity. This is the dark side of chosen status. If you're chosen, everyone else becomes disposable. And the narrative sanitizes it by calling it holiness. Let's not pretend this is ancient misunderstanding. The text celebrates the violence. It turns conquest into liturgy. Trumpets, priests, ark processions, it's religion fused with warfare. The line between worship and bloodshed vanishes completely. Every victory is credited to divine will, every defeat is blamed on insufficient faith. It's a closed system. You can't argue against it because the outcome, whatever it is, always proves the theology right. Win a war? God is with us. Lose a war? We sinned. That's ideological perfection. You can't disprove it. And through all of this, the prophets appear as auditors, not visionaries. They enforce compliance. When the people forget the law, the prophet recites the contract. When they sin, the prophet threatens consequences. It's not mystical foresight, it's legal repetition. If you disobey, famine will come. If you disobey, invasion will strike. And when it happens, they claim vindication. That's how the prophetic system sustains itself. It predicts the inevitable consequences of human behavior, then calls fulfillment divine proof. Brilliant. Cynical. Unstoppable. Even the structure of worship reveals how invasive the system is. Every offering, every festival, every calendar cycle, Passover, Pentecost, Tabernacles, is a scheduled reminder of dependency. The people can't forget because they're forced to reenact their submission year after year. The whole culture becomes liturgical surveillance. Miss the Passover? You're cut off. Work on the Sabbath? Death. The covenant doesn't just govern behavior, it owns time itself. It dictates when you eat, when you rest, when you mate, when you mourn. There's no secular space. Every act is religiously regulated. That's total control. Let's dissect the psychology. Imagine growing up in that system. Every misstep could bring plague. Every leader claims divine authority. The national identity is built on paranoia, stay pure or be destroyed. It's a civilization addicted to anxiety. Prophets thrive on it, priests monetize it, rulers exploit it. The line between faith and fear dissolves completely. That's why rebellion is the only recurring theme. You can't maintain that level of submission without cracks forming. The golden calf wasn't random, it was rebellion against impossible pressure. And every rebellion, of course, becomes proof the system is needed even more. That's the loop. And the Ark of the Covenant, let's not romanticize it. It's not a glowing box of wonder. It's a portable throne, a war emblem. It travels with the army. It kills anyone who touches it improperly. It's divine weaponry, both physically and psychologically. You can't look at it without dying. You can't question it without punishment. It's the ultimate symbol of a sacred untouchability. The object represents total authority over life, death, and truth. Whoever controls the Ark controls the narrative of God's presence. Notice something else, the covenant is always renewed through blood. From Abraham's severed animals, to circumcision, to Passover lambs, to temple sacrifices, the entire theology is soaked in the language of bleeding. Blood equals legitimacy. You don't get promises through meditation or virtue. You get them through death. The system's currency is life itself. And that's not metaphor. It's literal slaughter. Then the priesthood institutionalizes it. You've got the Aaronic line, the chosen within the chosen. They control access to forgiveness. They define who's clean or unclean. They decide who lives near the camp, who gets cast out, who eats the offerings. It's power dressed in linen robes. The high priest becomes the gatekeeper between humanity and divinity. That's not spirituality, it's administration. And when corruption creeps in, as it always does, the prophets don't abolish the system, they threaten reform through more obedience. The punishment for bad leadership is more submission. That's how self-perpetuating hierarchies survive. Even the geography of the covenant is manipulative. The promised land isn't just soil, it's surveillance territory. Every border, every tribe, every boundary line is drawn to ensure containment. You can't escape without violating divine order. And when you do, the consequences are immediate: famine, invasion, exile. The land itself is personified as moral judge. If you sin, the land vomits you out. The environment becomes part of the enforcement network. That's theological totalitarianism. Here's what no one tells you about Israel's monarchy and fall. When kings take over the covenant, the system eats its children. From Saul to Solomon to the divided kingdoms, the prophetic covenant becomes state ideology. The temple becomes propaganda. The throne becomes altar. The prophets become internal auditors threatening palace coups. This is power dressed in divine legitimacy, and it's brutal. Saul is an unstable start, a king anointed out of desperation. He's flawed, capricious, paranoid. But his rise signals the shift. Israel wants a human shepherd, not a roaming god. That becomes a problem. Humans are flawed. He disobeys commands, dishes out violence, hunts David like a dog. The covenant isn't flexible, it reacts. The people demand stability. God reluctantly concedes a monarchy. That concession breaks the covenant's paradox. Divine kingship now must be mediated through human politics. The moment Saul fails, his removal becomes theology. He's not just dethroned, he's disqualified by divine contract. Enter David, the golden boy. He consolidates power, centralizes worship, moves the ark to Jerusalem, lays the foundation for a dynasty. But notice, his greatest strength is also his greatest vulnerability. His personal transgressions become national crises. Bathsheba, Uriah, they are not side stories. They're covenant law in motion: adultery, murder. God sends prophets to question the king. Nathan doesn't sweet talk. He indicts. The model is clear. Even your king is subject to the covenant's legal structure. Even your national symbols aren't beyond scrutiny. Under Solomon, it accelerates. Massive building, central temple, royal splendor, but also forced labor, heavy taxation, polygamy, foreign cults sneaking in. The covenant demands purity. The kingdom feeds corruption. Prophecy doesn't pause. It sharpens. Solomon's foreign alliances open the door to idolatry. Temples built to foreign gods inside Israel's borders. Corruption seeps into worship. The prophet declares the system is rotting within. Yet, the people love prosperity. They ignore the cracks. The covenant whispers, success doesn't absolve you. Then the split, Israel and Judah. Now you have two kingdoms, two political machines, two sets of propagandists. The northern kings, Israel, plunge harder, worship Baal, build altars on every hill, kidnap prophets, massacre prophetic voices. They multiply priests to compete with prophetic policing. Their theology becomes decentralized and chaotic. The prophets keep screaming, "You've broken the covenant, you're sovereign renegades, judgment is coming." But kings double down, legitimacy through oppression. Judah fares slightly better, lineage of David holds prestige. But even so, they're not safe. Every king balances between reforms and backlash. The temple's oracle is powerful, but always under threat by politics. The priests and prophets spar. Prophet Hananiah argues with Jeremiah. Political factions bribe or silence prophets. Power protects itself by co-opting prophecy. Kings use religion to stifle dissent. Guess what? Prophets don't back down, they sharpen accusations, threaten blood. As Assyria rises, Israel trembles. The prophets say, this is not conquest, it's punishment. But don't be fooled, the empire isn't just tools in God's hand. The empire is a real geopolitical force. Prophetic logic abstracts it, makes it divine instrument. The conquest of Samaria becomes validation of covenant justice. The kings oppose, but the prophetic narrative has already declared the verdict. The people are led off into exile. The northern kingdom is erased. The institution of the covenant is under pressure. What do you do when half your people vanish? You recast theology. Judah watches. They see the fate of Israel. They hear the prophets warn, "You're next if you don't repent." Some kings try reforms. Hezekiah, Josiah, tear down high places, remove idols, centralize worship. But the covenant is broken too deeply. Political compromise, foreign alliances, internal corruption, they undo reforms. They restore idols. They imprison prophets. They neuter reforming courts. The theology turns tyrannical, prophets demand radical purity, rulers cling tighter to power. The conflict intensifies. Then Babylon approaches. Nebuchadnezzar is no divine whim, he's a rising force. The prophets don't predict him, they name him as consequence. Judah fights back, rebels, breaks treaty agreements, politics. But prophecy frames rebellion as cosmic treason. The siege of Jerusalem is not just war. It's the execution of a covenant verdict. Famine, siege, betrayal, civil war, or a drama of collapse. Jerusalem falls. Beit is burned. Temple is leveled. The center of the covenant is destroyed. Jeremiah watches in horror. The temple's destruction is a rupture. The priesthood scattered. The populace exiled. Prophecy doesn't abandon Israel, it shifts tone. Grief, lament, bewilderment. Ezekiel sees the glory depart. The sacred presence flees. The covenant appears broken. The people cry, "Why, God?" Prophetic voices insist, "Because you broke your end of the treaty." Loyalty was breached. The system stalls. The promise is now when, not if. The prophetic timeline morphs. Silence falls. The covenant lies in ruins, along with the nation. When the exiles return, everyone expects redemption. What they get is reconstruction with a hangover. Babylon's gone, Persia's in charge, and the new regime is smarter. They don't burn your gods, they manage them. Cyrus issues a decree: go home, rebuild your temple, worship freely. Sounds generous until you realize it's imperial strategy. The Persians fund the rebuilding not because they love Yahweh, but because they want stability in the western provinces. A temple is cheaper than a rebellion. So Israel's restoration begins as a controlled project, sponsored spirituality under foreign oversight. The survivors drag themselves back to a wasteland. Jerusalem is rubble. The Temple Mount is a crater. The Ark is gone, no one knows where. The glory cloud? Vanished. What's left is trauma and bureaucracy. Ezra the scribe and Nehemiah the governor show up not as prophets, but as administrators. They don't hear voices from heaven, they enforce laws. The new Israel is built on paperwork, genealogies, tax records, temple inventories, priestly purity lists. The tone shifts from revelation to regulation. The priests run the nation like an audit office. Every marriage, every offering, every name on the registry is inspected. Spirituality becomes border control. The temple gets rebuilt, smaller, sadder, and hollow. The elders who remember Solomon's version weep at the sight. The prophets Haggai and Zechariah try to hype it up: the glory of this latter house will be greater than the former. But they're selling hope to a burnt-out population. The Shekinah never returns. There's no fire on the altar, no thunder from the sky. The Holy of Holies sits empty. The people rebuild ritual without presence, bureaucracy without ecstasy. The system keeps running because it has to, not because it works. Meanwhile, the Persian world order gives birth to something new: apocalyptic thinking. The Old Covenant theology, sin, punishment, restoration, can't explain why they're still slaves even after obeying. They rebuild, they pray, they tithe, and yet foreign kings still rule them. The answer? Cosmic delay. The timeline gets pushed upward, into heaven. The justice that never arrives on earth gets relocated to another dimension. Enter Daniel. His book reads like resistance literature wrapped in dream code. Statues of metal, beasts from the sea, a stone that crushes empires, every image is political camouflage. You can't openly criticize Persia, so you invent visions. History becomes prophecy. The prophet isn't predicting the future, he's disguising critique as revelation. Daniel's 70 weeks prophecy maps history as countdown. Empires become arithmetic. Babylon, Persia, Greece, a mysterious fourth beast, each one devours the last. The message is clear: kingdoms rise and fall on schedule. God's plan runs like a machine. That formula becomes addictive. The community starts measuring time itself as a prophecy. Every famine, every invasion, every rumor of rebellion becomes a sign. This is when religion mutates into calculation. The priest becomes an accountant of eternity. The Hellenistic era arrives and tears everything apart again. Alexander storms through like a storm god. Greek culture infects everything: language, art, philosophy, religion. The Jews split, some embrace the cosmopolitan world, others double down on purity. The covenant morphs into identity politics. You're either pure Israel or polluted hybrid. The law becomes weaponized to preserve ethnic survival. Circumcision, dietary rules, Sabbath, these aren't just commandments anymore, they're resistance acts. Every bite of non-kosher food becomes treason. Every foreign marriage becomes infiltration. Then Antiochus IV, an arrogant Greek king, decides to finish what Babylon started. He invades Jerusalem, desecrates the temple, sacrifices pigs on the altar, erects a statue of Zeus. He doesn't just conquer, he humiliates. That act detonates the Maccabean revolt. Finally, the covenant explodes into military violence. The priesthood picks up swords. Holiness becomes war doctrine. And here's the irony: the same priests who condemned violence under David now sanctify it under Judas Maccabeus. Killing for God is back in fashion. The rededication of the temple, the origin of Hanukkah, is celebrated as miracle. But politically, it's a coup. The Hasmonean dynasty that follows is priest kingship, a fusion of altar and throne. Exactly the kind of structure earlier prophets condemned. History repeats with new uniforms. By this stage, Israel is addicted to restoration myths. Every crisis gets spun as precursor to redemption. Prophets dry up, scribes take over. The apocalyptic texts multiply: Enoch, Jubilees, the Sibylline oracles. They describe heavenly watchers, judgment days, secret timelines. The idea of this age when the age to come becomes dogma. The world is divided into two eras, now and soon. The people live perpetually waiting for cosmic intervention. No longer expecting national reform, they're waiting for a total reboot of reality. That's not hope, that's existential exhaustion disguised as theology. Back on the ground, corruption returns. The rebuilt temple becomes a power hub again, controlled by high priestly families who buy their positions from foreign rulers. The tithe system turns predatory. The poor pay for the rich to stay pure. The same pattern repeats: law as leverage, ritual as currency. The priests collaborate with occupiers to maintain control. Every rebellion gets suppressed, every prophet silenced, every dream deferred. The covenant becomes a zombie, still walking, but soulless. Yet, the scribes keep writing. They can't stop. If the temple is a shell, maybe the text can be the new temple. That's how Torah study becomes worship. Literacy becomes holiness. The scribe replaces the prophet, the page replaces the altar. They start building fences around the law, interpretations upon interpretations, to make sure no one ever breaks it again. That's where legalism takes over. The obsession with ritual purity becomes a survival mechanism, but it's also a cage. Religion becomes paperwork masquerading as passion. And through it all, foreign powers keep cycling: Persia, Greece, Seleucids, Hasmoneans, then Rome. Each empire uses the same tactic: manage religion, not erase it. Control the temple, appoint the priests, set the taxes, and you own the people. The covenant's machinery becomes a colonial tool. The idea of divine chosenness, once the rallying cry, is now used to pacify revolt. Obey God, endure oppression, the reward will come later. That's the apocalyptic drug talking. It keeps the oppressed waiting for justice that never lands. When Rome finally steps in, the structure is fully institutionalized. Herod the Great rebuilds the temple again, massive, dazzling, a propaganda masterpiece. He's half Idumean, half Jewish, fully political. He bribes priests, murders rivals, and claims divine legitimacy. The rebuilt temple is bigger than Solomon's but emptier than ever. The holy place is now guarded by Roman soldiers. The sacrifices continue, the festivals roll on, but the covenant's pulse is gone. Religion survives as theater, not conviction. Every prayer echoes in a hollow sanctuary. You're asking for the heart of the 70 weeks prophecy, the bones, the controversy, the cracks in the sacred text. Fine. Strap in. This is where theology becomes math, dreams become politics, and prophecy becomes a pressure cooker. Daniel is on his knees. Babylon is behind him, exile nearly done. He prays. And Gabriel shows up, not to comfort him, but to load him with a timeline, 77s, 490 years engineered for Israel and Jerusalem. That's the scaffolding. But this isn't a gentle roadmap, it's a gauntlet. Daniel 9 verses 24 to 27 sets 6 brutal objectives: finish transgression, end sin, atone for iniquity, bring in everlasting righteousness, seal vision and prophecy, anoint the most holy. That's not easy. It's exhaustive. It demands full divine intervention or full collapse. So Gabriel says, from the moment the decree to rebuild Jerusalem goes out until Messiah the Prince, there are 7 plus 62 weeks. Then, after the 62 weeks, the Messiah is cut off. He doesn't stay long. Then that people of the prince who is to come destroy the city and sanctuary. Then there's a finals week, a covenant confirmed, sacrifices ended, an abomination installed. The last week is violent, divisive, shocking. Interpretations explode. Some say all 490 years unfolded back then. Others see a gap, a parenthesis, between week 69 and week 70. That gap becomes a theological no man's land. It's where the church age is inserted, where silence reigns until the 70th week kicks in at a future tribulation. That's dispensational futurism. The final week, they say, is coming. The Antichrist will confirm a treaty, break it midweek, desecrate the temple, wage war. That's kind of the default in modern evangelical prophecy charts. But the controversial bit, this prophecy was never neutral, never simple. It's surgical. It calibrates timing to validate a messianic claim. When Jesus comes, followers see week 69 as fulfilled. The cutting off becomes the crucifixion. The destruction of the city's sanctuary becomes AD 70. The 70th week is still floating, future puzzle piece. That's tight hermeneutics, not loose faith. The prophecy becomes a scaffolding for Christian theology and Jewish expectation simultaneously, but always under tension. Some scholars reject the futurist split entirely. They argue there is no gap. The 70 weeks were all fulfilled in the first century. The final week concludes with destruction and consummation in the same epoch. The prince to come is a Roman general, the temple defiler is Titus or Roman forces. The abomination is Pompey or imperial cult altars. The timeline closes then and there. That makes prophecy self-contained, not postponed. It kills the tradition of predicting a distant Antichrist. It forces you to wrestle with the prophetic violence of your own history. Another mess inside this prophecy, what is of week? Hebrew uses sevens, could be days, could be years. Most go with years. And then there's calendar math. Prophetic years are often 360 days, not 365. So 490 times 360 is equal to 176,400 days. But how you align that with solar calendar? With decrees? With lunar adjustments? It's messy. But prophetic interpreters do it anyway. They mash Persian edicts, Greek historic events, Jewish temple calendars all into one precise map. The puzzle demands precision or your prophecy breaks. And then there's the 6 objectives clause. You don't just predict events, you claim they will accomplish cosmic tasks. Finish transgression, make reconciliation, seal vision, those are theological judgments, not historical footnotes. The prophecy isn't passive, it's active. It demands mastery over sin, justice, revelation. The Messiah must do much more than arrive, he must complete divine intentions. If history drags, prophecy is falsified or you insert a gap. Even more explosive, the covenant with many in the final week. That's a deal. Many theological systems assume that covenant refers to Israel. Others see it as a global peace treaty. In prophetic charts, it becomes the Antichrist promising security to nations. He will build, he will protect, he will perform until he betrays it all. The temple sacrifices end. The abomination is proclaimed. The timeline's terms reverse, blessings become curses, worship becomes apostasy. Notice how this prophecy demands dual fulfillment, a first coming plus a future climax. Jesus fits the first 69 weeks. The final week is deferred. But the text never says gap. The gap is interpretive. It's theological scaffolding inserted to protect prophecy from failing. That's daring. That's dangerous. You either accept prophetic failure or you insert a pause. The pause becomes doctrine. Then there is the church's silence. Daniel's prophecy is explicitly about your peoples and holy city. It's national, not universal. Yet Christian theology universalizes it. The church becomes the heir of Israel in prophetic time. The Jewish identity is subsumed. The prophecy, written for a national covenant people, becomes the blueprint for a global church's future. That's appropriation of prophetic text. It transforms Israel's covenant into church dogma. But what about those who push back? Critical scholars see redaction layers. They argue that the 70 weeks prophecy was shaped under oppression, especially under Antiochus IV, to legitimize resistance. They say the author grafted earlier traditions of 70 years into 77s to galvanize hope. They read V24:27 as a prophetic manifesto, not crystal-clear chronological prediction. The weeks are ideological, not chronological. The text becomes less about predicting exact dates and more about mapping divine justice across oppression cycles. Some reject prophecy in the strict sense. They see apocalyptic literature speaking in symbolic time, not literal. The prophecy is an invitation, not a guaranteed contract. Even within Christian interpreters, there's chaos. Do you start counting from Artaxerxes' decree in 445 BC? Or from another Persian king's decree? Do you use Jewish or Roman calendars? Do you count half weeks as 3.5 years? Do you collapse periods or stretch them? Each decision shifts the arrival date by decades. Yet defenders adjust. No matter how far the prophecy drifts, they realign events: Messiah, fall of Jerusalem, Roman persecutions. Then they claim, see? Prophecy vindicated. That's not blind faith, that's narrative surgery. Prophecy becomes apologetic: pluck a date that works, argue it aligns, then say fulfillment confirmed. But when a prophecy is so movable it can survive multiple reinterpretations, that's less divine infallibility and more rhetorical resilience. The 70 weeks prophecy is a theological survival machine. It refuses to die because interpreters give it flexibility, but also demand it stay precise. That's the tension. And the emotional charge is brutal. You're telling people there is a cosmic timer over Israel. That not only nations but divine covenants operate on schedules. You tell a people their exile, their temple, their suffering, their identity are part of an engineered prophetic arc. It means nothing is random. Every war, every desecration becomes meaningful. That weight crushes hope and inflates fear. The prophecy is not comforting. It's a cosmic lever: pull it wrong and your theology collapses. Then the curse: if Jesus isn't the cut-off Messiah, the prophecy implodes. If the final week never comes, the system becomes ash. But the tradition depends on it coming. That's the pressure. Every century that passes without a fully recognized 70th week fuels reinterpretation, radical reconfiguration, revival of the gap theory, reshuffling of prophetic chart dates. The system evolves to survive. So you see, beneath the facade of dates and weeks lies control. The prophecy becomes a temporal authority. You don't just worship God, you watch His calendar. The faithful learn to live by prophecy, not by present reality. Every crisis is mapped to the 70th week. Every world leader might be the prince who is to come. Every treaty, every desecrated altar, every rebellion gets folded into that prophecy's frame. It's a cosmic script that hijacks daily life. After the smoke clears and the temple lies in ruins, Israel's prophetic machine doesn't stop, it mutates. The timeline collapses into a single catastrophe: the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE. That's the ground zero of faith, identity, and prophecy. Everything the scribes built, the priesthood, the sacrifices, the temple economy, burns to ash in one Roman siege. Titus's legions don't just destroy a building, they destroy the world that made sense of the covenant. It's not a war, it's annihilation disguised as divine fulfillment. The Romans come prepared for theater. They besiege Jerusalem during Passover, hundreds of thousands trapped inside the city walls. Food runs out. Cannibalism spreads. Priests still try to keep the rituals going even as corpses pile in the courtyards. The holy fire goes out for the last time. When the walls are breached, the Romans torch the temple. Gold melts, flows through the stones. The treasures are hauled to Rome. The Arch of Titus still brags about it: Jews chained, menorah carried off as loot. That's how a civilization ends, documented, celebrated, and carved into marble. For the survivors, this isn't just defeat. It's theological crisis. If the temple is gone, where does God live? If the covenant was eternal, how can its house be rubble? The Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, they all had their answers. The Sadducees vanish, their temple-based theology reduced to memory. The Essenes scatter, their apocalyptic dreams buried with their scrolls at Qumran. The Pharisees adapt. They rebrand obedience as survival. They turn Torah study into portable holiness. The synagogue replaces the altar. The rabbi replaces the priest. The book replaces the temple. Prophecy turns inward. No more thunder. No more fire. Only interpretation. But the prophetic imagination doesn't die. It evolves into apocalyptic expectation. Every trauma gets folded into an invisible schedule. The destruction of the temple becomes judgment. The diaspora becomes scattering before restoration. The timeline doesn't end, it expands into cosmic dimensions. The war against Rome becomes the prelude to the war against all empires. Revelation picks up the script from Daniel, the beasts, the seals, the trumpets, the abomination reborn. The old temple is gone, but prophecy rebuilds a new one in heaven. Now history itself is the temple, and every empire that rises becomes the next candidate for divine demolition. Rome knows how to manage memory. They don't just conquer land, they colonize meaning. They rename Judea as Palestina to erase the national identity. They ban Jews from Jerusalem, turn the Temple Mount into a pagan shrine. But erasure backfires, it fuels myth. The absence becomes sacred. The people start measuring time in exiles and promises. Every Passover ends with a vow, next year in Jerusalem. The prophecy becomes survival code, encrypted in liturgy. The people carry it across continents, across centuries. Every displacement renews the same expectation, the rebuilding, the return, the Messiah. Meanwhile, Christian theology hijacks the narrative. The fall of Jerusalem becomes proof text. See? The old covenant failed. The new one begins. The destruction of the temple becomes divine endorsement of replacement. The church declares itself the new Israel. The prophetic clock is reset. The covenant doesn't die, it's reproposed. What was once national judgment becomes spiritual symbolism. The physical temple becomes metaphor for the human heart. The city becomes the new Jerusalem descending from heaven. Prophecy is rebranded as eschatology. That's how empire swallows revelation, by absorbing it into doctrine. But underneath that theological spin is raw history, a nation flattened, identity rebuilt in exile, scripture weaponized for survival. The rabbis compile the Mishnah, then the Talmud, a massive system to make life under foreign rule livable. They transform prophecy into debate. Every law, every story, every ruling keeps the covenant breathing. The divine voice goes silent, but commentary becomes the new revelation. The old prophets heard thunder, the rabbis hear logic. It's pragmatic genius. Without it, the tradition dies. But the cost is enormous, prophecy becomes bureaucracy, inspiration replaced by interpretation. Then there's the messianic tension. After 70 CE, dozens of messiahs rise, each claiming to be the one to end the exile. Simon Bar Kokhba is the most famous. Charismatic, militaristic, endorsed by scholars, hailed as the star out of Jacob. He rebuilds Jerusalem, mints coins, restarts sacrifices. For a brief moment, it looks like prophecy fulfilled. Then Rome returns, exterminates 500,000 Jews, bans their presence in the city permanently. The prophetic dream turns nightmare again. From that point forward, messianic hope becomes radioactive. Every new claimant is met with skepticism or persecution. Prophecy still burns, but underground. By the time the dust settles, two parallel religions emerge from the wreckage: Rabbinic Judaism and Christianity. Both claim the timeline, both reinterpret the covenant. Judaism says, the prophecy is paused until the Messiah comes. Christianity says, the prophecy is fulfilled in Christ. Same source, opposite conclusions. The same 70 weeks, the same abomination, the same destruction, rewired into competing cosmologies. That's the ultimate fracture. The same text becomes two worlds. The destruction of the temple also births a new obsession, the end. Every empire that rises afterward, Byzantium, Islam, Crusades, the Ottomans, is filtered through apocalyptic logic. The Jews wait for restoration, Christians wait for return, both stare at Jerusalem as ground zero of destiny. Prophecy has become geopolitical currency. Kings, popes, sultans, all use it. The holy city is no longer just sacred, it's strategic. Through centuries of exile, commentary becomes the new prophecy. The Talmudic age codifies identity. In Christian theology, revelation becomes the flagship of divine vengeance. Both traditions keep reloading the same symbols: beasts, horns, stars, mountains, armies. The same vocabulary repeats across millennia, reshaped by whoever holds power. Prophecy becomes a template that every generation fills with its own enemies. The irony is sharp. The temple that was supposed to house the eternal God becomes history's most recycled ruin. It stands, falls, and rises again in words, never in stone. Each attempt to rebuild, under Persian rule, under Herod, under Zealots, ends in chaos. It's as if the narrative itself refuses closure. The prophetic engine needs tension to survive. The promise of restoration can never be fulfilled permanently. It has to stay open, unresolved, so it can be invoked again and again. That's how it keeps control alive. Even the geography of the site becomes contested theology. Jews see it as the lost dwelling of God. Christians see it as prophecies past. Muslims inherit it as sacred ground, Haram al-Sharif, tying Abrahamic lineage into a new revelation. The same hill carries three competing blueprints for divine authority. Every empire that holds it rewrites prophecy to fit its rule. Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, Islam, Britain, all claim they're part of the story. The Temple Mount becomes the most contested piece of land on earth because it's not just territory, it's theology in stone. After 70 CE, prophecy ceases to be national narrative and becomes survival myth. It's no longer about who rules the land, but about who owns the meaning of time. The fall of Jerusalem doesn't close the timeline, it globalizes it. Every religion that traces back to that mountain builds its own sequel. The idea of divine judgment and restoration spreads worldwide. The Old Covenant becomes blueprint for apocalyptic imagination across civilizations. This is how the prophetic system outlives its own nation. It fragments, reforms, multiplies, and seeps into every worldview that touches the Bible. You can't kill a prophecy that feeds on its own ruins. The covenant was supposed to bind a people, it ended up binding history itself. Every empire becomes its stage. Every disaster becomes its proof. And that's the story no one tells in church, in synagogue, or in mosque, that the so-called prophetic timeline isn't a countdown to redemption. It's a repeating cycle of destruction, rebuilding, and reinterpretation. The moment the temple fell, prophecy stopped being national destiny and became global scriptwriting. Everyone since has been trying to finish a story that refuses to end. Thank you for watching and sticking with me to the end of this deep dive. If you made it this far, you understand how much of history is built not on miracles, but on management, how prophecy was never prediction, but the operating system of belief itself. I appreciate you for staying through the entire breakdown. See you in the next episode.